One of the segments we were going to do on this show today was about what might happen if the Lions lose their offensive coordinator, the practicalities that come with that. What does it really mean when you lose the guy at the top of that chain? Well, scrapping that one because it doesn't matter anymore. Ben Johnson reportedly coming back to the Lions, according to Tom Pelissero. A shocker, I think, to most people who aren't in the know and talking to these coaching agents every day. Diana Rossini reported that this is something that had been in the work for a few weeks, potentially. It was not a guarantee that he was going to be headed to Washington or to one of those open jobs. Adam Schefter reported something similar earlier this morning. What do you make of Ben Johnson heading back to Detroit after entering this cycle as, I would guess, the hottest coaching candidate on the market?
He was the hottest coaching candidate on the market. And then, what Shefty tweeted was interesting. Like, he wasn't always like promised a job or something crazy. I'm like, how? He's the smartest offensive mind out there. He's been in these meetings and these interviews for 2 years now. And I mean, does he just love Jared Goff that much? Does he just love the situation so much? No, because when you get a chance to be one of 32 people in the world to have a head coaching gig, you take it. And someone was like, oh, maybe it was Schefter, like his asking price spooked some teams. Well, I mean, dude, the asking price is probably $15 million. I mean, you got guys out there making $20, $18 million a year. Andy Reid, Sean Payton, all those guys. So it's just an interesting thing. I mean, when you told me before the show, I hadn't checked Twitter in 15 minutes, of course, and within the 15 minutes, I hadn't checked Twitter. Something happened, and I wasn't ready, and I was just like a little bit in shock because I love who Ben Johnson is. I think that he probably interviewed well. It just he was asking for too much money, but I don't know. It's an interesting situation. I'm sure there'll be more to come in the next day or so, and just explaining why he didn't get a job, but I just I don't get it. Look, I know he wanted to focus on Detroit's run, and rightfully so. He hadn't interviewed obviously in person for any of these guys, and just interesting. I mean, because didn't they have the interview yesterday? Didn't the Commanders? Didn't they fly out to Detroit? It was either this morning or yesterday, and they flew out. They interviewed Aaron Glenn and Ben Johnson. So maybe it was something like Ben Johnson just didn't feel comfortable with, or maybe the Commanders didn't feel comfortable with. But you got to imagine with the new hiring of the GM, second pick in the draft, all the capital, it's about as clean slate as you can get, as our producer Beller stated. And so it was a shock to me. And now, I mean, our whole conversation, which was the fourth of our show, is scrapped. But I do think that it's an amazing get for Dan Campbell. And I do think that Ben Johnson's probably going to be the highest paid offensive coordinator. There's probably some of that backdoor and going, hey, if I come back, what are you going to give me salary wise? And they got a lot of pieces coming back. Jared Goff's probably going to get another contract. What's it going to look like? And the whole conversation we were going to have is like, when a guy like Ben Johnson were to step away and go, how do you replace it? Especially from a CEO type coach. Do you promote from within? Do you go out and get somebody? All that, it doesn't matter anymore. It's a huge get for Dan Campbell and the Lions.
Yeah, I mean, now you just get to run it back. You get to run it back with the same offensive infrastructure. The personnel is probably going to be the same or better next year. This is a team with money to spend, a team with its full arsenal of draft picks, and they're in very good shape to make that offense even more potent and dangerous next year than it was last year. And if you look at the decision, I understand it. Last season, going to Carolina, you're a team that is going to trade up for the number one pick. It's going to be short on draft capital. It's not the best quarterback draft. Obviously, what happened with C.J. Stroud is interesting in hindsight, but it wasn't billed as that. It wasn't like this class where Caleb Williams and Drake May were considered these high-level prospects. Yeah. And Carolina was not in a good spot. It's an arranged marriage with a GM that is there and possibly on the hot seat. You have a owner that is developing a very bad reputation as somebody that's difficult to work with. The Washington job didn't seem like it came with those sorts of hangups. You have a path to one of the top two quarterbacks in this year's draft, which are guys that people really, really like. You have a new front office led by a guy who, almost like your situation in Detroit, turned down other opportunities previously, but jumped at this one because it seemed like such a good job. You have a full arsenal of cap space. You have a lot of draft capital. It's a blank slate with an ownership group that I think the people are particularly excited about. So to not take this job, that's the one that's curious to me. And
Yeah.
I will be fascinated to hear what the reasoning was and what some of the push and the pull each direction were that ultimately led to this happening.
Yeah, and I mean, other than, at least from my point of view and thinking, other than the Chargers job, which I think Harbaugh was going to get from the jump, I think this was the second best job available, and I think that they had a lot of firepower for everything that you just said, and for everyone, including myself, we all thought it was Ben Johnson as a lock, and we thought, oh, for sure he's going to get his opportunity. Now it's going to be interesting to see what they pivot to and who they go to. That's what my question is. Are they going to continue with an offensive guy? Are they going to go Mike McDonald? Are they going to go Vrabel, big leadership guy? Are they going to go try to steal Dan Quinn? I mean, those are the three hottest names still out in the cycle. I mean, Aaron Glenn obviously took an interview there as well. So who knows what's going to happen? I mean, this is wild.
If you look at Washington's collection of interviews, I believe the only offensive-minded play calling coach that they interviewed outside of Eric Bieniemy is Bobby Sloak. So if they were going to go that direction, Bobby Sloak seems to be the guy who would get that job. Other guys that have interviewed there, Mike McDonald, Aaron Glenn, like you mentioned, Anthony Weaver, who is the defensive line coach and assistant head coach for the Ravens, who has been a name that's popped up in this cycle. And in Seattle, it's Mike McDonald, Dan Quinn, Mike Kafka, Patrick Graham, Ejiro Evero. Those are the guys who are still available. So now Mike McDonald seems like he might have his chance between those jobs.
Yeah, well, exactly. But I feel like in the Commanders, you have to go offense, right? You have to go off. You're picking a quarterback at 2. You got to turn that thing around. Right? I mean, with a new ownership group and you got the quarterback whisperer and Bobby Sloak, does Bobby Sloak get another interview with them now? Or do they just go with the best leader and you hire a new hot name OC if you're Mike McDonald? But who do you bring with you? Because all the hot OC names are sort of gone at this point. And that was sort of something that the Commanders and the Seahawks, right, going into Championship Sunday and past the divisional round when they were interviewing people from the Ravens and the Lions, right, McDonald, this is what you sort of get. You're like one of the last to hire, and all the good OC candidates are taken up. And if you're not getting that hot name in Ben Johnson at offense or at the offensive head coach, obviously, then where do you go?
Yeah. I think it's a very good point.
It puts you back into a wall a little bit because you waited all this time. You thought it was going to be Ben Johnson or Mike McDonald. And if you probably thought it's Mike McDonald and you're going to hire him, just say you're going to hire him. Who's your OC? Like, who is your OC when you're building a quarterback up from scratch? No better, in my opinion, than hiring Bobby Sloak and then going and getting a big name DC, which those are already filled out. So it just puts you in a bind and you're sort of the last one on the train. And you sort of get maybe left with some leftovers, and people don't want to hear that, but that's the truth, right? Like all the hot names are gone at DC, OC. I mean, it's a fascinating situation.
When I look at the young quarterbacks who've been developed in the NFL, who've made progress over their first couple of years and taken a step into the upper echelon of the league, the only one that comes with a defensive-minded head coach in recent memory is Josh Allen with Sean McDermott. And it's a similar sort of situation. They had Rick Dennison as their offensive coordinator in year one. Gosh. It was only 1 year. I mean, yeah, he was an offensive line coach for Gary Kubiak for years and years and years. He comes from that system. And they replaced him after 1 year with Brian Daboll. And it ended up working out, but that's not the most direct path to making sure that you give your quarterback the best chance to succeed. I mean, every single other one you want to point to, Patrick Mahomes, Joe Burrow, Lamar Jackson as a CEO type head coach. So what they did with Greg Roman, I think, was probably another example of it working out and you giving a quarterback a path because you're building something specifically around him. But I tend to agree with you that the easiest way to get there is by putting the right offensive-minded head coach in charge, because then that becomes the entire direction and focus of your franchise.
Well, and here's another name too that I keep hearing on Pat McAfee show. I keep hearing on other things, and we share an agent, so I should probably just ask my agent, is Cliff Kingsbury. If they do hire a defensive-minded head coach, does Cliff get back into the mix in Seattle or like Commanders? And there's some stuff that comes.
How much
with him,
Arizona Cardinals offense did you watch over the last few years?
Well, I think that was more personnel-wise. I truly think it was personnel-wise. But like everyone's saying he's a hot candidate. So does he get the job? He's like the only one that is sort of left out there as OC. I mean, unless you're bringing your own guys from the Ravens, if Mike McDonald gets it, or Dan Quinn. I mean, I don't know who the heck knows, man. It's a wild situation.
At this point, if the guy that you really wanted is off the board, if Ben Johnson was truly their number one pick, I think I would be okay saying, let's not just go offense just to do it if we don't think that Bobby Slowick is even not the best candidate, but in the same category as these other guys. If we're worried about his ability, and I don't know if this is true or not, I assume he interviewed very well because he's an impressive person, but if to lead a team, to reshape an organization. I mean, when you're talking about this blank slate, it's a big job. And I think that somebody with either experience or maybe a little bit more time as even a coordinator maybe becomes a little bit more attractive. Even if Dan Quinn isn't the home run swing that a Ben Johnson or even a Bobby Slowick might be in terms of the ceiling, would you be more comfortable giving it to someone who's actually done this job before because there's a tiny bit of certainty that comes along with it? I don't necessarily ascribe to that idea. I just wonder if that could creep into Washington's thinking as they try to make this decision.
I think it does. I think it absolutely does. And I think that I'm with you 100%. I do think if Washington thinks that Ben Johnson, which I think was their man all along, and something happened in contract negotiations or maybe OC hire or DC hire or staff hires, I think you do. I mean, it's a great point about reshaping an organization. Forget about just the offensive standpoint right now. Like, you got decades and decades long of just like fan base pandemonium with their past owner and 3 different football changes on their names and who are like. So I do think I mean, you know, if you're leaning that way, you got to be able to go from Ben Johnson to, okay, that's why I think Mike Vrabel. Like, he's going to transform your defense, and like, if he could get a good OC and somehow figure that one out. I mean, the fact that Mike Vrabel isn't on there, and let's not forget, I'm telling you, let's not forget about Bill Belichick. He is still out there. Okay.
Yeah. Do you go back to the table now a little bit because it didn't turn out the way that you wanted it to? Yeah. What are you in a hire to do at this point? There's only one other team that's trying to fill an opening. Who would you lose out on if you took a little bit more time to make your decision?
Exactly. No one. Maybe Dan Quinn or someone who's going to go up in Seattle. But I do think it's interesting if they go back to the table and they just say, okay, we didn't get our guy in Ben Johnson. Let's get Belichick for a year or 2 or maybe 3 max, because that's probably all he's going to coach. Say a 2-year deal. Hey, Bill, just come in and let's change our organization around. And I don't think he gets control of the roster. I mean, there's so many fascinating scenarios.
What about the Mac Jones development plan over the last couple of years would make you feel comfortable about handing a rookie quarterback to Bill Belichick at this stage?
Do you bring Josh McDaniels back in?
Well, that's what I mean.
You know, it's like, I don't know. Is what's more important is the organization or the quarterback perspective who you're drafting to, which would probably be Drake May at this point. And do you want to draft him and see his development go, or do you want to see a complete organizational change?
And that's the question that Washington's going to have to be wrestling with. The last thing I wanted to say here, and I don't mean to throw him under the bus, I just think it points to how unpredictable this cycle ended up being. Albert Breer, in the middle of the season, I don't know if he reported this, but just wrote this for Sports Illustrated, that as all of these jobs came open, maybe 8 to 10 of them, the 2 guys that the league was certain would be head coaches in 2024 were Bill Belichick and Ben Johnson. And now it seems like there's a pretty good chance that neither of them got a job in this cycle with all of these jobs being open. So hard to predict this stuff sometimes. It has been a very strange set of moves and set of occurrences here in the coaching carousel.